Okay, Megan, jump in lap. Ah, here we go. The undead were once feared by Dungeons & Dragons players, but not anymore. We're going to look at why. Today I'll focus on one thing through all the editions of D&D and Pathfinder, which is rooted in D&D, to see how it evolved. I'm inspired by a series done by Matt Colville looking at the fighter in every edition of D&D and looking at the game's evolution that he did about 10 years ago, and also by the entire channel Daddy Rolled a One, who does extensive videos on old school D&D. And today I'll focus on energy drain in D&D and Pathfinder. First, we're going to look over what it did originally, how it has evolved and been nerfed over time, and then ask ourselves, old school versus modern, which did it better? First, an introduction. I'm Ronnie, the Dungeon Daddy, also known as the Rules Lawyer. I am a lawyer who runs tabletop role-playing games. Pathfinder 2e is my preferred edition, but I am a nerd of D&D history. Support my Patreon. I don't make money as an attorney. For an explanation, look at the video whose thumbnail is on the screen. Supporting my Patreon gives you ad-free early access to most of my videos and exclusive content. The undead are frightening enough, if you think about it. They are unsettling by their very nature that they're dead, and how do you defeat something that has already been killed? Well, Dave Arneson and Gary Gygax had some ideas on how to make them stand out against players. They liked to put things in their dungeons that were like cruel jokes that kept them on their toes. You see an empty hallway? Well, fuck you. That's a gelatinous cube standing in the way that you'll get stuck in. Ooh, a treasure chest until it punches you and eats you alive. Found a room that you need to search carefully? Well, the ceiling has something to say about it. The lurker above will drop on you and constrict you to death. These two are cheeky bastards, weren't they? They were all various ways to say fuck you. Dungeons were perilous and were supposed to screw you over even in how they were designed, walking down a hallway that imperceptibly takes you to a lower, more dangerous level. Mazes that players are supposed to map where they are rotated without the players knowing. And you were supposed to fear the monsters just as much, if not more. They had special abilities that they would surprise you with. I did a video recently where I looked at how deadly D&D's base combat is, even against a lowly goblin. But the undead in D&D made you fear them even more. Let's take a look at the undead presented in the original version of Dungeons & Dragons in 1974. Here they are presented in obviously increasing power. Their number of hit dice increases. First off, while generally you would have a chance that monsters you encounter might not attack you at first sight, many undead were an exception. Second, many undead were just immune to a lot of spells, including the very important and powerful first-level magic user spell, Sleep. Skeletons would very soon take only half damage from non-bludgeoning weapons. Ghouls, by the time the AD&D Monster Manual came around, could paralyze you, and they had 3 attacks that they could paralyze you with. And there was no given duration for the paralysis. Wights, however, are when the undead got real. They could only be affected by silver or magical weapons. Your normal weapons did nothing to them. But they also got the dreaded energy drain ability. What was energy drain? You lost a level of experience. You lost all the benefits of that level, including hit points, accuracy, spellcasting, and you had no saving throw against this. If they hit you, you lost that level. And if you were first level, you died. Your experience point total went down as well, naturally. This becomes spelled out later, and this is taken from 1983's basic red box. Imagine you're a cleric who, through your blood, sweat, and tears, have attained the 2nd level of experience. You're no longer an acolyte, but an adept. Characters had different titles according to their level back then. As a 2nd level cleric, you could now cast 1 spell per day. Yes, in basic D&D and original D&D, you could not cast spells at 1st level as a cleric. Well, now you've attained 2,800 experience points, and you're almost at 3rd level. Well, this is what happens when a wight touches you. Your experience point total goes down from 2,800 to the midpoint of the previous level, which in this case was 750 experience points. You've lost 75% of all your XP total. You lose everything immediately, including a spell if you had one prepared. And there is no way to cure it, except for a very high level spell, a 7th level cleric spell, which was the pinnacle of cleric spellcasting ability. Cleric spell levels only went up to 7. This required a cleric of 16th or 17th level who had 1 or 2 million experience points, and in original D&D, NPCs could not cast this for you because it incapacitated you 2 to 20 days. Even if you cast Restoration, here it is in AD&D, the game said fuck you. You only got exactly the number of experience points necessary to restore you to your old level. There's at least 2 low-level classic D&D adventures I know of where a wight jumps out and attacks the PCs, and This is a double fuck you to that low-level party because they might not be able to harm it without silver or magic weapons, and then you have level drain. Remember, in the old days, people didn't necessarily know the monster manual, and all of these monsters were brand new. Going back to the chart, we see after wights, there are wraiths, which are kind of upgraded versions of wights, and then mummies, which can inflict a wasting disease, make it harder for you to heal. But once you get to specters and vampires, they could drain 2 levels of experience from you, as if 1 wasn't enough. So imagine your playgroup has been meeting for 2 or 3 years, and you've earned 400,000 experience points each together. You have a 9th level fighter, a 9th level cleric, and an 11th level magic user and 11th level thief. Here's the fighter's advancement chart in AD&D. You are a lord, someone who at this level has earned name level, and so therefore you can gather NPC followers, men-at-arms, to serve you in your keep. The specter touches you, and you immediately lose 2 levels and lose over 300,000 experience points. You now have only 97,500. And as a 7th level fighter, you've taken a hit to your accuracy and can no longer attract men-at-arms to your keep. And we're not done. What's to stop that specter from hitting you again? Now you've lost 2 more levels and are now a 5th level fighter with about 7% of your former experience point total, and you can no longer make an extra attack every other round. That's how energy drain worked in old school D&D. However, it has since been nerfed, progressively nerfed over time with subsequent editions. So let's look at what happened. With the 3rd edition, which saw the first major redesign of the system, D&D made significant changes. If you got hit by a wight or a similar creature, you didn't immediately lose a level. What you got was instead called a negative level. Something with a specific effect, which I'll go into. But if your number of negative levels equaled or exceeded your level, then you immediately died. And if you're not dead, you get a -1 penalty per negative level to a bunch of your statistics, including your effective level for various purposes, including the power of a spell you cast. You also immediately lost one of your highest level spells. And 3.5 edition added losing 5 hit points per negative level. This simplified things. You didn't have to remember how many hit points you had at a previous level, and you didn't lose other class features. However, after 24 hours, you had to do a saving throw, and you got a saving throw. That is a nerf compared to what existed before. But if you failed, then you lost an actual level. And it works as before. Your experience point total goes to the midpoint of the previous level. So if our wight hits you with a slam attack, you immediately get a negative level with those penalties we looked at earlier. And 24 hours later, you must do a fortitude saving throw, DC 14. If you fail, you actually lose a level. So for the long term, wights are still very scary. However, you have a chance to avoid it. But perhaps the biggest change with 3rd edition is it's now much easier to remove level drain, with the restoration spell no longer being a 7th level cleric spell, which remember was the highest spell level back then. It's now only a 4th level cleric spell, and cleric spell levels go up to 9 starting in 3rd edition. This spell removes all negative levels, that temporary condition you had before you had permanent loss, and it restores 1 experience level. However, you still only get exactly the number of experience points that would take you to your original level. You still have a permanent loss of experience. There's also a material cost of 100 gold of diamond dust, which is not much. So you're likely to gain that level back because this spell is much more available within the world. However, you still take that hit to your experience points. The next edition to come out was D&D 4e, which, as many people know, is an outlier in the evolution of the game. Its ideas still influence current editions, however, it feels and is very distinct. Well, in 4e, wights made you lose a healing surge. If you come from D&D 5e, think of losing a hit die. Healing surges are what you spend when you do a short rest in order to get hit points back. We also see among the energy-draining undead, like the Wraith, that these creatures tend to give you a temporary debuff, like the weakened condition, which made your attacks do half damage. But that's it. There's no big debilitating effect weakening your stats beyond the current fight. A year later, Paizo came out with Pathfinder 1st Edition, which had the slogan, 3E lives. It continued to support 3rd edition style play for players who did not want to move on to 4E. It nerfs energy drain further. What it does is it provides negative levels, yes, but spellcasters do not lose any spells. And it draws a distinction between temporary negative levels and permanent negative levels, which is the end state if you fail your saving throw after 24 hours this time. Most effects that confer negative levels in Pathfinder turn them into permanent negative levels if you failed your saving throw. And this is not an actual loss of level. Here is the nerf to energy drain. The penalties you get from those negative levels simply become permanent. You don't actually lose abilities from your level or spellcasting ability or experience points. You retain all of them. On the flip side, the cost of restoring a permanent negative level has been increased to 1,000 gold. So Pathfinder decides to punish you not in the XP department, but in the gold department. And this isn't the only time Pathfinder made that decision. This is also true about how it changed magical crafting from 3rd edition. There's one minor way that they strengthened energy drain, however. They allowed monsters to do double the number of negative levels on a critical hit. 5 years after Pathfinder, we get D&D 5th edition in 2014. And here I'm going to treat both 5e and what I call 5.5e the same, because they treat energy drain mostly the same way. I imagine most viewers are most familiar with this. Here we have the white dealing 1d6 plus 2 damage, and you get a constitution saving throw. And if you fail that saving throw, the amount of damage done is also subtracted from your maximum hit point total. If this brings your maximum HP down to 0, you die. However, just like how 5e lets you get all your hit points back with a long rest will remove all life drain from you. So it's a debuff for that day only. Also, 1d6 plus 2 is not a whole lot, and the white could only do this once per round. The Wraith and the Vampire could meanwhile drain substantially more, about 20 points of damage per hit. Compared to 3rd edition D&D and its spiritual successor, Pathfinder, it is definitely a nerf, because there's nothing resembling level loss here and an overall nerfing of your abilities. However, notably, the new Wraith does not call for a saving throw, so this is kind of a little retrograde movement towards making energy drain scarier. The Greater Restoration spell can restore your maximum hit point total. However, it's a 5th level spell now instead of 4th, but it's still at the low price of 100 gold. What Pathfinder 2e does, I would argue, is similar to what D&D now does. When a white hits you, you get to do a saving throw, and if you fail, you become drained 1. And if you were already drained, your drain value goes up by 1. Drained is like damage to your constitution in D&D. It lowers your maximum and current hit point total by the drained value times your level. So if you're a 6th level character and become drained 2, you lose 12 hit points, and your maximum hit point total also goes down by 12. You also get that number as a penalty to your fortitude saving throws. It's basically a more streamlined, less bookkeepy way to do ability score damage. Doing a long rest reduces your drained value by only 1, however. So overall, it's more debilitating and has more of an overall effect on your character. As in the previous edition of Pathfinder, a 4th level, now called 4th rank, spell can remove the drained condition. And it doesn't cost anything. A couple of years ago, Pathfinder did a remaster in order to split away from the OGL after the OGL crisis, and they moved increasingly away from being a copy of D&D. And the white has this new ability called Corrupting Spite. If they hit you and you fail your saving throw, you get an affliction which forces you to make a new fortitude save every round. And remember, your fortitude is affected by your drained condition, so it could be a vicious cycle. And every time you fail a saving throw, your drained value increases, and you eventually stop treating any creatures as allies. Other energy draining undead, like the Wraith and the Spectre, Pathfinder has also made changes to so that they don't just take life force away. So let's review the history of our friend Energy Drain and how it has weakened with nearly every edition. In its original form, it was the most terrifying monster ability in the game. You lost an actual level, you lost the abilities that came with that level, you had no saving throw to resist it or to remove it. It was a permanent change to your character. It took top-level magic to remove it. Even if you could remove it, you suffered a permanent loss of experience points. And if too much energy drain was piled on, it could be fatal. With 3rd edition, you could now make a saving throw, albeit delayed, to prevent an actual level loss. And the means to restore that lost level became much more accessible by becoming a much lower level spell. D&D 4e is an outlier, and I'm not going to take anything off the list. Basically, it checks none of these boxes. It is the weakest energy drain in all of the editions I cover today. It's a debuff for that fight only. Well, you lose 1 healing surge per successful hit for some such monsters. But starting at level 1, you had between 6 to 12 healing surges. It's not a huge deal. Compared to D&D 3rd edition, Pathfinder 1e nerfed energy drain further. No longer was there a danger of losing an actual level, so your XP total didn't change and there was no danger of having a permanent loss of XP. D&D 5e simplified and arguably nerfed the immediate effect of energy drain, being just a lowering of your maximum hit points, and it also made it not permanent. You can remove its effects with a long rest. Pathfinder 2e goes a step further because it is no longer fatal. It only imposes a condition, which is an encumbrance on your hit points and your stats, which in most cases cannot go above drained 4, which is not enough to kill pretty much any character. There's a couple of monsters, though, that can kill you with energy drain, but I won't cover them today. So some final thoughts about energy drain. It put the fear of God into players, and it succeeded at making the primal fear felt by your player characters felt as fear by you, the real-life person. And whether that was a good mechanic or not, leaving that question aside, it definitely was effective at that. This resulted even more in having mixed level parties in old school D&D, which already was naturally happening because of the different XP progression tables that different classes had, and also by how multi-classing worked, where you split your XP between different classes. D&D and Pathfinder today kind of assume everyone is of the same level of experience, but that wasn't true, especially in the old days. And having this range of levels in the party was mitigated by a few things. First, there was just a flatter power curve in the system. There wasn't much of a difference between a 5th level fighter who could attack once per round and a 6th level fighter who also could attack only once per round. Under the default rules in AD&D, they had the exact same accuracy. It's just that the 6th level fighter had more hit points. And it might have mattered for a few spells you were subjected to or traps how many hit dice or levels you had. Another mitigating factor was the exponential XP progression that was in old school D&D. When you look at the fighters table, the XP requirements basically double at every level. There's a presumed slowing down of leveling up with every level of experience, at least until you reach name level for your class. So if you were energy drained, you theoretically could quote-unquote catch up with the rest of your party, though still running behind, because remember, if you got a restoration spell, you only returned to the minimum amount of XP you needed to get to your old level. So back to our first example of the 2nd level cleric who went down from 2800 to 750 XP when they got energy drained. That sounds extremely tragic. However, assuming that cleric survives and continues to adventure with their original party, that deficit becomes insignificant as time goes on. In fact, if this cleric were in the same party as this fighter who had the same amount of experience points at the time she was energy drained, she actually reaches level 4 faster than the fighter does because clerics in general need fewer experience points than fighters in AD&D to advance. Also, another mitigating factor is an assumption of mine, and I like to hear confirmation in the comments from people who played old school D&D. I think that DMs probably made restoration scrolls available to their parties so that they could reverse energy drain, or at least lessen the effects of energy drain. You know what I mean. That's what the 1988 computer game Pool of Radiance did, which I played when I was a kid. It was a low-level adventure that had you facing a bunch of energy-draining undead. However, there were a lot of restoration scrolls to get those levels back. However, it was still debilitating. In our example of the 9th level fighter from earlier, even with a restoration scroll, they would still be 150,000 XP behind the rest of the party permanently. Basically, overall, old school play had a different set of expectations, one in which balance was not a priority as much as it is now. And when I say balance here, I mean it in every sense. It includes balance among the player characters within the party, but also balance overall. Modern GMs, game masters, want to have tools to be able to predict the difficulty of a fight that they present to a party. But in the first years of the hobby, this was not as much a priority, arguably because the tech wasn't developed yet. But also, given the tech level at the time, the focus was providing a simulation. The initial expectation in these early books was to use random tables to create environments and populate it with random monsters and give them randomly generated treasure. If a player was screwed by energy drain or what have you, that was just how the dice fell. And also, at least this is the impression I get looking at old school D&D, which I have not played extensively myself, is that magic items were more important, far more important than your level in determining how powerful you were as a character. A level 7 fighter might have a +2 accuracy bonus compared to a fighter 2 levels lower, but the 5th level fighter might have a +2 magical sword and a ring of protection and some flying boots. Old school embraced the randomness. But in modern D&D and Pathfinder, balance is a goal. First, there generally in the modern campaign, more emphasis on story and narrative, where you have a consistent group of characters, that is, death is much less likely, where you have the same band of heroes throughout. The priority is less the simulation and more the story of these heroes. What naturally comes with that is a kind of egalitarian desire to make sure that no one lags behind, which level drain and permanent XP loss imposes. In this new paradigm, a permanent nerf to your character's power for the entire length of this campaign is seen as disruptive and undesirable. This combines with the fact that modern D&D and Pathfinder make a conscious effort to have a steady and significant jump in power at every new level. One, they want to make leveling up exciting, something people look forward to. Having no dead levels is a goal in both of these systems. But also, it lets you stretch the rubber band, I like to call it. If you want to have a working encounter building system that lets a GM predict the challenge a certain encounter will pose to a party, you want level to mean actually level. This means that level needs to be more important than the magic items that you have in figuring out how strong your character is. This makes level drain very disruptive because, well, in Pathfinder 2e, every movement up 2 levels doubles that creature's power, and every 2 levels lost cuts that creature's power in half. This is concomitant with having a working and counterbalancing system. However, it does rule out things like level drain on player characters in the game. Now, which approach is better, the old school or the modern? Well, kind of obviously, the market has spoken. The games and the designers of these games have shifted towards the modern approach. So in a general capitalist, pleasing the market sense, the modern way has prevailed and is quote-unquote better. Even Shadowdark RPG, which uses a modern design to present an old school-like experience, does not have level drain. What you have instead is creatures like ghosts do damage to your constitution score, and if that goes down to 0, you die. However, a long rest restores all of that constitution damage, at least under the default Shadowdark rules. So level drain seems to have gone the way of the dodo after being nerfed over time through the additions. However, that doesn't mean it's not fun for some people, it's not objectively worse. This is just the majority trend in the hobby. So I'd like to know what you all think in the comments. And I want to hear war stories of old school play. Did your tables run these rules as written? Because if I were to run these rules for some unsuspecting players, I see myself being hesitant to pull the trigger. Maybe I'm not as hardcore as some of you. So that concludes this video, though if you have requests for me to cover other aspects of the game in a similar fashion, definitely let me know in the comments. You also might be interested in a video I did. It was a satirical video in which I pretended that Wizards of the Coast designers were nerfing the wizard class by taking inspiration from old school D&D, where, okay, not everybody took that video well, they thought I was serious, but the purpose of that video was to look at how the original game put limitations on spellcasters that, when taken away by the time 5th edition came around, has led to a buffing of spellcasters and a widening of the martial caster disparity. So to conclude, support my Patreon for ad-free early access to most of my videos and exclusive content. Also join my Patreon, there are more than 6,000 of us. I hang out there a lot. We talk Pathfinder 2e and other gaming and other systems, and if you want to play Pathfinder 2e in our drop-in, drop-out organized play system, it's called Endless Tale Tavern on that server. So that's it. I've been Ronald the Rules Lawyer. See you next time.